60 minutes with Mama Nature. Feel the breeze, no imitator. Birds them chant and trees them sway. Roots reveal what ancestors say. One whole hour, heartbeat slow, where the healing rivers flow. In the bush, feel the vibe. Mama Earth, she come alive.
All right. Good night. Good night. Good night. So, sorry for the lateness, guys, and sorry for not being able to post today. I did record, but we had power outage, and so I wasn't able to post today's 60 minutes. But we did have herb walk, and I'm excited. I actually have some students with me, and it was a very informative herb walk that we had, and we're going to share that with you, and then we're going to go through the herbs. But this evening, so because with this evening we didn't have our herb walk, we weren't able to. And we did we looked at some of the herbs that we featured, some of the herbs that we featured already in the past, and we found some new herbs that I'm excited to share with you as well. So I want to welcome ACLB. Welcome. I am Miss B. Hold on. Welcome. I am Miss B. Welcome JM Songwriter. Welcome Joy. So it is good to have you guys tonight. Tonight we want to look at what I call birth work, and for the whole of this month, I'm going to be doing a series of presentation on birth, and we're going to be looking at birth work, and having birth. So I have two guests with me. I have two guests with me. Oops. I have two guests with me, and one is a midwife, and the other is a doula, which is a practitioner who provides emotional support and other support for women, some pre-birth and during birth, and sometimes even post-birth. I'm doing this series because I believe that birth is, good night Victoria, I believe that birthing is natural, and I believe that when a human being is leaving the earth, is usually what they conduct is a spiritual activity, what we call a funeral. So it's a spiritual activity that they use to usher that person out. And so I believe when a person is entering in the world, it should be a spiritual activity. So birth is supposed to really be a spiritual activity. And it used to be a spiritual activity. When a child was being born, it was a time when that child, the first person to touch that child, would have been a spiritual positive energy. Now it is seen as a medical situation. And so Victoria now reached home from work, tired but looked on. Okay, wonderful. And so it's not that anymore. And so I believe that that is one of the reasons why so many persons who have been who have received negative energy, someone have received negative energy at birth. And so tonight you're going to hear from two persons who are involved in birth. And what they share is very enlightening, very enlightening. I promise you, it's very enlightening. And so without further delay, I'm going to exit, and I'm going to bring on our two guests to share. But this is actually a recording, so I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you are richly blessed from it. All right, guys, welcome to another edition of Indigenous Health. I am excited to be here tonight. I hope you are excited to be here with us as much as I am excited to be with you. Tonight we're starting a new series. It is a series entitled The Sacred Birth Work Series. The Sacred Birth Work Series. And I want to dedicate this series to my grandmother, Iselin Herlock. And she was born June 12, 1915, and she transitioned January 26, 1997. This dedication, or this show, is not only dedicated to my grandmother, but it's also dedicated to all the mothers and grandmothers who have worked and served as midwives in their community. My grandmother was a midwife in the village that she's from, which is Orange in St. James, Jamaica, where she delivered many of the children in the community. And so I'm excited to share and to celebrate with her the monumental work that she has done. I personally believe that the gift or the gift of healing that I'm involved in is flowing through her. And so tonight I hope to be explore the wisdom, traditions, and holistic practices that support pregnancy, birth, and postpartum care. We're going to be diving right into the sacred roles of doulas and midwives in holistic maternal care. We hope to explore how these birth workers provide physical, emotional, and spiritual support, bridging ancient traditions with modern needs. And so tonight, we have joining us two birth workers. Let me start out by introducing our first guest, who is Tayoma.
Tayoma.
Thank you. Tayoma. And Tayoma is an experienced traditional midwife, deeply rooted in traditional and holistic birth practices. And we also have with us Natalie Francis. And Natalie is a dedicated doula practitioner who has spent years guiding mothers through not only pregnancy and labor, but also postpartum recovery. Together, they are going to help us understand the vital roles that they play in creating a more empowering and informed birth experience. Ladies, welcome and good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. And it's
All
actually
right.
Facey, not Natalie Francis. Facey.
Facey. Sorry, Natalie Francis is a friend of mine. Facey. And I'll put their information up in a little while. But let me start out with you, Natalie. Can you share with us your journey into birth work? What inspired you to become a doula practitioner?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ben. And I first want to give thanks to you for inviting me on the show, and also gratitude to Sister Tayoma for all the work that she's been doing. Really grateful to be here with the both of you. What inspired me to do birth work? It isn't something that I was planning to do. It's something that ended up being a part of my journey. And my initiation into birth work was actually loss. So during my first pregnancy ended in a loss at 17 plus weeks. And in anyone's first pregnancy, I think who's never been exposed to loss, you definitely don't expect it. And so after that experience and thinking about becoming pregnant again, I decided to be trained as a birth doula. And I really wanted to understand the entire birthing process so that I could feel safe enough to go on that journey again. So I really became trained as a doula for me. So
Okay.
the journey to be a smoother one. And then after that experience, went through another experience with a lot of different pregnancy challenges and really just could see firsthand the lack of support that I needed that wasn't there and wanted to fill that gap. And so in addition to birth doula support, I think of myself as accompanying people all along the pregnancy journey. And usually people come to me when they've experienced some loss or some challenge with fertility or pregnancy or some health condition that makes pregnancy more complicated. For other people, it's because they've gone through some trauma. It could be sexual trauma that makes pregnancy and birthing, something that brings up a lot of emotions for them. And so I usually work with people who are having a more difficult pregnancy journey, and I consider myself as someone who accompanies them throughout that journey, provides resources, support them in their emotional healing and the processing and the releasing, and really just being with there throughout the entire process, pregnancy, conception, pregnancy, childbirth, after childbirth, and even through parenting. So it really has been a beautiful journey.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Um, Tayoma?
Yes. Well, you want to know about my journey into birth.
Yes.
All right. Well, I thank you for describing me as a traditional midwife because that is really how I think of myself. I have different training. My initial training was through apprenticeship. And how that came about was I had my first child at home. I was actually starting out in the hospital where I felt very, very alienated from the process. The doctor would walk in, like examine, and it was never a personal experience. There were never any questions answered except very brusquely, very like briefly. And so I really felt outside of the process. I felt like, it's almost like a mechanic comes in and he starts filling with the car and you're like, well, what's wrong? You couldn't understand, but this is my body, so it felt like, God, I don't really want to do this. I was already embracing Rastafari. I was already changing my diet. Everything was becoming much more organic, more natural. But this particular process remained very clinical until one day somebody walked in. I was working in a place called Aphrodisia in New York. She's an herb and spice store. And being there, I was learning a lot about herbs and, their uses and, just really immersing myself in that process of discovery. And so sorry, telephone uh, intervention there. But and so one day somebody walked in and said she was pregnant, and she said to me, "Oh yeah, I'm having a home birth." I was like, "You could do that?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm a midwife. I see her, uptown, and she's gonna come to my home to deliver the baby."
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want. So I started to get to know this midwife, and her name was Nakaway Cuevas. She was from Puerto Rico, and she was an indigenous Taino uh, woman. And so I started to learn with her. I mean, her process, she had learned from a, medical doctor actually. And then, fill in some blanks for herself around the natural processes of birth. But, just being with her after I gave birth and experiencing the personal touch, the love. We didn't have quote unquote doulas at that time,
Mhm.
but my mother was there and an aunt was there as well. So they were very helpful. They actually tried to take over the process, but that's another story for another day. But just, feeling the difference in the clinical medical approach and the natural midwife approach was so empowering for me. I felt like all women should have this. They should have the love, they should have the support, they should have the outreach, they should have the classes, they should have the breastfeeding support. It was a global approach. And so I asked her after a year. I was like, can I come with you to births? Can I apprentice with you? And she said yes. So that was the beginning of my journey. And it was for me very personal, but also very political, um, very much about, the Black community and the lack of support that we often faced in hospitals, and the feeling of being outside of our own bodies, outside of our own process, and not included, but rather, set aside, and the experts would take over. But we are our own experts. So for me, it felt very much like a calling, and I feel like birth calls us. We don't really call it. We're just there, going, "Oh yes, yes, I'll do that." So it was a real blessing to be able to work with her, because I got to go. I was the doula, really, although we didn't call it that at the time, because I would go, I'd rub the backs and make the tea and rub their feet and tell them you can do it and remind them to breathe and help them just, through the various stages of birth, and then go see them, of course, after the birth as well. So, you know, after that, working with her for a year or so, people started to ask me to come to births, and I did. And so, as a primary practitioner, and then just to let long story short, I eventually decided to go back to school. I had already a bachelor's in philosophy, interestingly, because again, the philosophical foundations of
Was there?
yeah, and I started to look at why it was, both politically and philosophically, that birth had gotten to this very clinical, cold stage, and been taken out of the hands of midwives, of women, and particularly of women of color. But so then after that, I did go back to school. Got a nursing degree and a master's in midwifery. But I forever feel like I am, a
A
traditional.
traditional practitioner, more of a traditional and a clinical practitioner.
Definitely, yes. The clinical is important. You need to know it. You need to know what's going on and when there's an issue. But I almost didn't graduate because I was just so like, no, you don't need to do that. No, you could do this instead. And I wasn't saying it out loud, but mentally I was like, not in their process. But graduate I did, and so I am certified nurse midwife.
Right. So thank you. Tioma. Is it Tioma or Tioma?
Sayoma.
Tioma. And I'm glad because we are not in any way undermining the importance of clinical delivery,
Yes,
um, because it has its place.
exactly.
But what many people don't know is that this is an option. There's an option for persons who don't want that clinical setting. And another alternative option exists. And so I wanted, each of you could go at it, but I wanted you to share with us what's the difference between a doula and a midwife. What's the difference? Natalie, you want to go first?
I'd actually love for Tayoma to start with the midwife piece first, and then I'll fill in the doula piece.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah. So So midwives are trained in the process of carrying out the prenatals. That's like pregnant, the pregnancy exams. And also, we're trained to be able to somewhat, guide the woman through the process of being pregnant, what she's going to need to do in terms of her nutrition. It's not heavily emphasized, but we are taught about nutrition and certain important elements that a woman must, consume, like, iron and calcium. And then, we're all taught, how to do blood pressures, how to check the urine, what to look for, the red flags, how to recognize things like gestational diabetes and gestational hypertension and toxemia, all of the clinical diseases, and then what to do from there on in. Um, we are trained in how to deliver the baby, and also in, if there is a tear, how to do stitching. Midwives are trained to do stitching as well. And then postpartum, what we need to watch out for, and how we need to care for a woman postpartum up to the 6 week point, and examination of the newborn as well, to make sure we have a healthy newborn, that there's no problem.
Okay. So the midwife is really focused and trained on the delivery process, on the delivery process.
Prenatal care,
Mm-hmm.
then delivery, and postpartum care as well. There is less emphasis on maybe supporting the woman emotionally, because that is more. But honestly, I worked for a long time without doula, because we didn't have doulas when I first came into midwifery, but we did. We have family members, but the trained doula was not an entity when I entered the field. So I, learned how to support women in that way as well. But I will say I love to have a doula, trained doula, because it's a dance, and Natalie will explain exactly more of what the doula does, but very, very helpful in a birth, very much so. It's kind of too much on the shoulders of the midwife, especially for first babies, especially if it's a water birth. We need the lovely support that doulas provide.
Okay. All right, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sister Tayoma. Yeah, so so Sister Tayama pointed to the fact that doulas weren't always in the birthing room, or having a person who was named the birth doula wasn't always in the room. And I think back to birth years and years ago, where it was, the aunties and the mothers and the sisters and the community members the ones who were invited into the space, who helped support the birthing process. So it's less that there was like an official title there, and that birth was supported, right, by the people who you wanted to be in the room, including the father or the co-parent. And my guess is that because our society has changed, where we're more in our little bubbles and living in silos, and things are more insular versus collective or community focused, that role developed over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trained as a birth doula in New York, and there was definitely a big need for birth doulas in New York. A major part of that was to help to become a buffer for a lot of difficult experiences that birthing people were going through. It's like the doulas were invited into, or the doulas were wanted into the hospitals, because birthing families felt that they would be more protected as doulas, which is kind of like a tricky situation to be in, because doulas alone can't like protect from the systems of oppression, but having a doula in the room has definitely been more supportive. So I would say overall, the role of the doula is to provide emotional
Mhm.
physical support. So doulas might encourage the birthing person to show positions that would help, the labor and the delivery to be more comfortable, more easeful, and also providing resources along the way. So different from like the aunties and the sisters or even the partner, the doula is trained into the stages in pregnancy, in labor, and postpartum, and can support the birthing person or the mama as she's going through those stages, and also helping the partner to know how they can support the birthing person. So that's important as well. And doulas have different magic. Each person who's in the birthing room, there are different things that they bring. So some people are trained in using herbal medicine. Some people are trained in using essential oils. Some people are trained in massage therapy. Me, for my magic is really, you know, really tuning into what's happening on an emotional level because I was a coach before I became a doula. So really tuning into what's happening in the person's psyche, what's happening on a mental, emotional level, and supporting them through that process. So one of the questions that I've asked in consultations with clients is like, what's the fear that you're holding going into the birthing room? Like, what's the fear behind the fear that you haven't told anyone yet because who's supporting you? I really want to know what you're saying. And sadly enough, sometimes it's that they're going to die in childbirth or that they're going to be mistreated or that, just based on the statistics that exist now with Black and brown people dying at a much, much higher rate than their white counterparts, it's like holding that fear that something terribly wrong will happen in childbirth. And if they're going into the room with that tightness, with that constriction, with that fear, it will impact
Mhm.
the birthing process. And so part of my role is to support them in that releasing and also helping them to understand that their bodies are built for birth, right? Supporting them in believing in themselves, believing in their bodies, connecting with the babies, connecting with their partner, so that they're really having a really empowering experience versus one that becomes more traumatic. So let's say that's the role of the birth doula and like my unique approach to it, or what feels as my calling as a birth worker.
Right. No, in preparing for this interview, I spent some time looking up doula and the role of a doula, and
Mhm.
I came across some interesting statistics. Because earlier on in Jamaica, when we moved birthing from home deliveries to clinical deliveries,
Mhm.
because some people may actually ask, and some people may even wondering, is this safe?
Mhm.
Are the risks higher? Because some people may feel safer giving birth in a clinical setting, but
Mhm.
it was ironic because not now, but in earlier days, there was a higher mortality rate for children
Mhm.
than there were for children born in home, because and that was due to in unsanitary conditions. No, um the numbers are a little lower, but maybe in Jamaica, maybe upwards in the 90 percentile range of children are born in clinical settings. So it's not fair to make that judgment now. But I believe that, as I said, I started out by saying that a child birth is a spiritual, not only a natural process, but a spiritual process. And so when a child enters the world, that first touch should preferably be should be in a spiritual setting, not as a clinical setting, because we don't know um, the spiritual or the emotional state that some of these persons are in who actually touch the child for the first time. Because as I said, that child is young, is vulnerable, it's a spiritual experience. And so many persons, I believe, as you talk about the whole concept of um, support, emotional support, what the mother is going through. Some mothers, some mothers are giving birth to children where they're not even certain if who the child's father is. There's just so much emotional trauma that is in that whole experience, and it's so important for us to see that. But how do midwives and doulas support each other? How do they work? How do they collaborate to support each other in the birthing process?
Hmm. Well, I'm so glad, yeah, to hear Natalie mention the fact that mothers are at risk. We're talking about in the United States, yeah,
Mhm.
but here as well, there's a lot that happens to mothers and to babies within a clinical setting, within a hospital setting. Some of it's not even, spoken of, and some of it is like more subtle emotional trauma, and
Mhm.
some of it is delayed trauma as well. So, I really want to touch on that a little later. But to answer your question, how midwives and doulas support one another, like I said, it's a dance between us. We are working together towards the same end, which is to give that support to that mother. I don't say I deliver the baby is delivered by the mother, really. Like major hard work and a lot of deep spiritual work as well to get that baby from heaven to earth. And so we support her in that process, and just make sure that she's hydrated, make sure that she's fed in the hospitals. They don't feed them. Why? Because they're preparing them in case they have to have a cesarean section, because they know that, like, I mean, half of these women, more than a half really, are going to have cesarean sections. But we want to prepare her for a healthy birth. So we want to support her energy by making sure that she's getting what she needs, getting the encouragement that she needs as well. So both the doula tends to come first, and she is observing the mother. And very often in hospitals, they check to make sure that they absolutely know how far along the woman is. Oh, she's 2 centimeters, she's 3. But we can usually look and tell about how many centimeters uh, dilate.
Dilated. Mhm.
And also we can look and we can tell, is she in active labor? We can hear when she starts to push. So all of these things are something that, midwives and doulas kind of know. So the doula will get there first. When she feels like the woman is picking up some speed, sometimes she call a midwife at that juncture, and midwife will come in. If the midwife is needed before the woman feels like she wants that midwife to just come in, and she wants to know how far along definitely she is. That can happen too, but a lot of time it's much more organic. Uh, so we support each other. The doula begins to support. The midwife may come. The doula may need to rest. The midwife will be there, or vice versa. You know, with the woman in labor. Um, if there is a suggestion that's to be made, like all right. So one time I had a doula come in, and she immediately whipped out some essential oils, and the essential oils were eucalyptus oil. So I was already using some homeopathy. So the thing about homeopathy, it doesn't really go well with like eucalyptus oil, peppermint oil. So I asked her, if she would, before using anything, if she could ask, run it by me first. because left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing at all times. Um, but yeah, if it's a long birth, like of course babies might take a longer time, a day, 2 days, sometimes even three, and it's perfectly normal. But that's just that slow, you know, amble that the woman takes towards having her baby.
Mhm.
So we're all there and we're kind of spelling each other, and we're giving each other helpful advice even. Do you think she needs to rest? I don't know. Let's try getting her to walk for a while because she's been resting for another hour, for hours already. So just collaborating to make the birth happen and happen healthily and well.
All right, thank you. Um, Natalie?
Yeah, thanks for all of that. The one thing that's coming up for me is, the acknowledgement of how different it's been working in the hospital setting versus working in like a home birth or birthing center setting with a midwife.
Yeah.
Um, so my work started out in the hospital, or that was like my first doula experience. And when I finally got to work with a midwife in a home birth setting or a birthing center setting, I was like, oh my gosh, we're on the same page. We're doing the same thing. Because in the hospital, it definitely, the friction is there. And the reason why the friction is there is because of the different, it's like the orientation for birth in the hospital versus the orientation for a more natural, holistic birthing process is very different. So Sister Tayama just mentioned, if the birth takes 3 days, that's okay. We're just going. We know that the baby's coming when the baby's in the hospital. It's very unlikely that they would allow your birth to take 3 days because they will scare you by saying that the birth is stalling and the baby's at risk of this and we need to do a C-section. And a major part of that is because it's embedded in the system of capitalism, right? They're trying to make money. So the quicker you come in and come out, that means that they have several people in that birthing room versus you spending 3 days in that birth. And it's like, it's such a painful reality because like these are beings coming through on the planet. Like that is one of the most precious experience ever. So why should it be like rushed and associated with capitalism? And so yeah, like when so essentially the doula and the midwife are a part of the birthing team. We're collaborating as such with the well-being of the parent and the child as the thing that's the top of our mind. It's not how quickly we get her to deliver, how quickly we get her out of the room. It's like the safety and the dignity of this birth. Yeah, so wanted to add that because it was coming up as well.
Yeah. As I said, in preparing for this presentation, I want persons to know that there are clinical institutions that employ the services of a doula. So this is not just something that is an indigenous practice. There are clinical hospitals in New York and other parts of the US and other parts of the world that have doulas that provide um, their services within that clinical setting. And part of that is because there was based on my research, there was a high correlation of death among minorities. So among blacks and among other minority groups, I think for every uh, Caucasian birth that was successful, there were about 3 that were unsuccessful of minorities. And part of that was linked to the fact that, persons, weren't getting the care, weren't getting the attention. I don't know. I would love for you to speak. And since Tioma is a midwife, maybe you can speak to that a little bit What's your knowledge in the US? What is your knowledge as it relates to the level of care that women get here in Jamaica? And of course, the idea is not to try to project the clinical setting in a negative light. That's not the purpose. It's
Mhm.
just to be realistic and help persons to understand that there are persons who may have a biased preference for a particular setting, and that may be because they don't have a balanced knowledge or a balanced understanding.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Very good point, Natalie, that, the concept of time is really, really different. The ideas about time are very different. And in fact, it's inscribed into the idea of whether or not a birth is safe. So if you're not, doing 2 centimeters every hour, it's not safe anymore. We're going to induce you. And if we induce you and it's not picking up and it's not happening, we're going to have to cut you. So all of this, is a factor of, you know,
I mean,
capitalism.
just what you just said a while ago, a lot of persons may not even know because this is how much ignorance um, women approach the subject. This is the amount of ignorance that women have in approaching the subject. That um, the definitions and the prerequisites that are used to determine whether you are induced or whether you are offered a cesarean. I mean, a lot of women don't even know about these issues.
Right, exactly. And the doctors don't always, well, they'll tell you things like, okay, you're 38 weeks now, the baby is done, the baby's
Fully
fine,
formed.
you can be born, yeah. Who made them? I don't want to say who made them God, to say that a baby should come out at that time. So what's happening now is you have doctors saying 38 weeks, I'm going to break your waters. 38 weeks, let me strip your membranes, which is a process that's done to encourage the cervix to dilate and open. 38 weeks, and if they do you break your waters, you have to be induced
Mm.
hereafter if you don't labor, because now there's an avenue for infection, and you may have to be put on antibiotics, if you haven't delivered within the week. So
So the natural process have been made into a very unnatural process, which may lead to the need for certain services, which may come at a cost.
exactly, it's been called a cascade of interventions. Where one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and then you have unnecessary surgery and often unwanted major abdominal surgery, which is what cesarean section is. Again, when it's needed, wonderful thing, life-saving tool. But if it's not needed, it robs the mother and baby of a bonding connection very often.
Mm-hmm.
It robs mother and baby of certain healthy interventions that would have taken place. And um, it it's more blood loss, more chance of infection. It's a much less healthy way of bringing a baby into world. There's a film called The Business of Being Born that really outlines a lot of that and really says, okay, all of these interventions actually are not necessary, but they happen as a result of the time being curtailed for you
Mm.
of your baby in a
Wow.
natural way.
I mean, this is amazing. Some of these things I knew, but I mean, um, hearing it from somebody who works or who has worked firsthand in this particular field is eye popping, is eye opening.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I mean, so many persons out there. Um, just give the name of that film again, because as many of you that are listening and are watching, I really would encourage you to go out there and watch this film. I'm gonna look for it myself. What's the name of the film?
It's called The Business of Being Born.
The Business
Yes.
of Being Born. So it's not so much a natural process anymore. It is a business, and businesses are intended to be exploited. So the birthing process that is supposed to be a natural process, that is, I believe, should be a spiritual process, for the most part, has become a business.
Yes.
Natalie, you want to weigh in?
Sorry, the mute button. Yeah, that's one of the films that I have recommended to clients as well, and it's actually a really old film. You can tell from like the graphics that it was a while ago, and so much of what's there is still relevant. It's the same thing that we're seeing, right? It's the same system. I know that you mentioned the statistics for Black and brown people, the unsuccessful birth compared to every successful birth for a white person. And in New York City, that statistic is actually 8 to 12 times. So
Is what? Pardon me? Is what?
12 times.
For every 12 successful Caucasian birth.
Black women are dying in childbirth 8 to 12 times more than white women are. In New York City.
In New York City.
The average is 3 to 4. And New York City, it's 8 to 12.
Wow. And I mean, we're talking about a part of the world where there's considered to be a higher level of healthcare. I wonder, maybe we need to, I mean, I would be intrigued to know what the statistics are here in Jamaica.
Yeah.
You know, if that statistic exists, it may be higher, maybe low, I don't know, but 8 to 12 times more is a very unacceptable number.
It's unacceptable. It's
Right.
concerning, and many of these are deaths that could have been prevented if there was, proper care after childbirth or proper care in the midst of childbirth. A lot of them, it's from, a part of it is, the system that we live in that teaches us over and over again through the media, through socialization, that people who have darker skin color, their lives value less, right? So for someone who's a practitioner and has a room with different people with different skin tones, based on their socialization, they will decide who they tend to first or who they tend to most, who's most important, whose life values most. And yeah, we continue to experience the impact of that. The other things that I've noticed, and this is from being in the hospital setting, like as a person who is receiving care and as a doula, if someone isn't partnered, if they're not there with like a partner, a husband, someone by their side, then the level of care is different, right? Because the partner offers a level of accountability that isn't there when someone goes in either as a single parent or when they go in not as a single parent but just with their partner not there. So that's also there's also the belief, and I don't know if medical students are still being taught this, but for years and years they were being taught, and maybe this is still the case, that people with this black skin were able to tolerate pain more. We have a higher threshold for pain.
Wow.
And so when women are saying, this is painful, I need help, I think something is wrong, it's more likely that their voice is going to be ignored. Right? Because they're just not believed. So there's a lot of like the socialization, a lot of the the implicit things that show up in the birthing room when we should be expected to get optimal level of care, because such a vulnerable position to be in. So I wanted to bring something to that as well.
Wow. I mean, these are just eye-opening. I mean, nowhere did I imagine that, you know, the topic would be so unraveling and eye-opening, and I'm really happy that you know, I decided, because as I said, I believe that if we are going to attack the issue of healthcare, we're seeing now that you know, our health is our responsibility. We have to take matters in our own hands. A lot of times we look to outside sources, we look to outside means to provide certain things for us. But you know, we need to understand that it needs to be, this is our responsibility. I want you to tell me, in terms of your work, with your birth work, how does indigenous wisdom or tradition influence your practice? I know for myself that one of my goals is really to try to get the scientific community to accept the wisdom of our ancestors, that even though natural medicine or traditional medicine was for the most part practiced as an art, it was also a science. And so, you know, we see modern science confirming a lot of what traditional wisdom and traditional knowledge has been affirming for years. How has traditional knowledge or wisdom impacted, you know, your practice? Let me start with Tayoma first.
Well, for sure, well, before we even leave the topic, I think part of the reason they believed or wanted to believe that Black women did not feel pain as much is that when you're causing someone to have pain or ignoring someone's pain, it eases your own conscience to think, "Oh, they're just,
Mm,
they're not really feeling what they say they're feeling.
right.
Move on
Right.
to someone else, or we can ignore what they're saying because they're really just, exaggerating, or they don't feel his pain because the so-called father of obstetrics, of gynecology, Marion Sims, who just recently had his statue, you may have read about this too,
Yes.
taken down. He used to operate on enslaved women without any anesthesia. So he had to then believe, oh no, it's not that bad. They don't really feel it like our woman would feel it, you know. And perhaps indeed the woman knew about certain herbs that they knew they'd better use if, Sims was coming. But that still didn't completely dismiss the pain, the amount of pain that they would be feeling.
Mm,
Again, they didn't want to feel that these women were actually feeling the amount of pain that they must have gone through. So hence, that is one tradition that they've handed down that they need to lose. So, you were asking about different methodologies that we use.
traditional knowledge or traditional wisdom. How has
Right.
it impacted your practice?
hmm So, for me particularly, it has been very, very important to explore traditional ways. For different midwives, it's different. Some midwives work in a hospital and they work with the hospital's drugs and the hospital methodology, and that's a choice. I'm so glad midwives are in the hospital because otherwise, women, I believe, would suffer more. You know, and I'm not saying it's all about suffering. Everybody chooses where they want to deliver to, and that's as long as it's an informed choice, then I do honor that. But with the of course, when I went to school, we learned all about the different medications, you know. But before that, I started to learn, just being at home, about different things that you could do. and just kept increasing that knowledge because I for sure, wanted to know that I felt comfortable being outside of the hospital. I wasn't depending on hospital methodologies or on hospital medications. So, and the thing is that recently I walked into a clinic and there was a young midwife just graduated. And, we were talking and I was saying to her, also, do you use herbs? And she said, she looked at me, she said, no, I don't want to lose my license. This is here in Jamaica.
Mm.
So they are told that, hey, leave that alone because it's not accepted in the medical establishment and you don't want to be challenged and maybe lose your license. So that's kind of sad because if I didn't have herbs and homeopathy and all the different techniques that I've learned, I would be scared to, be dealing
And
with
about and maybe about, and about 50 years ago, about 50, 60 years ago, most children, uh, most home births, this was for the most part all that they had as it relates to medicine.
exactly,
So a lot of
exactly,
these medical doctors are benefactors of that, or their parents were benefactors of that, and now all of a sudden, it has become dangerous.
hmm
And maybe to some extent, it may be true because maybe if you don't have any training or any knowledge, then yeah, it can become dangerous.
exactly. My mother had her first child, my brother, at home with my auntie who was a nurse at the time, her sister, and there was a lot going on. It was a bit of a complex situation, but my mother ended up bleeding so heavily that she had to be transported to the hospital immediately. And they actually almost thought that they were going to lose her. So I think perhaps my aunt didn't know about,
Mm-hmm.
we call, the baby teas that were important to have by so that
Mm-hmm.
if there was a bleed,
And we're going to talk about the herbs. So, guys, if you're watching, we are going to talk about some herbs that are safe, that have been used traditionally as it relates to the birthing process, both for mothers, for children, to help persons going into labor, to help persons after labor. And a matter of fact, one of the tonics that we make available to a lot of our women is a compound of traditional herbs, a compound formula I mean, it's over 50 years old because when women gave birth back then, they were sent home and they were told what herbal teas to take to help the healing process and to help the womb to come back to its natural form and function. So a lot of these herbs were so tonifying and are so effective that a lot of the women, um, very shortly after giving birth, were pregnant again. A lot of the herbs. So we're going to talk about some of those herbs because part of the work of traditional midwives was offering help for women because we see a lot of young girls who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, ovarian cysts, fibroids, a lot of these issues. And part of that is because a lot of girls know, a lot of young ladies are not taught, for example, what does a healthy menstrual cycle look like? You know, back then these were discussions. Mothers were able to, our grandmothers were able to inform their daughters and their granddaughters. So I mean, if there's no other way, we have seen women health being affected by the loss of this knowledge. It is definitely in this particular era. Um, you want to say anything before we move to Natalie?
Oh, about herbs and stuff.
Traditional, yeah.
Traditional, yeah, man. Well, yeah, the woman both to get pregnant, you know what I mean, because there are times when there are difficulties with a woman conceiving. There are certainly herbs that are very helpful
Helpful. Mm-hmm.
in terms of, encouraging fertility. And I'm sure you know about a few. Should I go into detail or?
No, we're going to talk about we have a whole session and that. We have a whole session because there's 3-part series. So we have a whole series based on just that alone.
Okay,
Not
okay,
for tonight.
all right.
All right. So let me hear from Natalie now. How has traditional knowledge and traditional wisdom impacted your practice as a doula worker?
Yeah, I would say that like my doorway in, or my way of birth work is less the traditional medicine, because that's still a step that I am being called to and will need to take, and it's more of the spiritual portal, like that pathway. So as just as a person who I'm always listening, I'm always hearing. I remember in one birth feeling the presence of someone's father who had made his transition. And it's like he was there and saying, and his love for her was so strong. Like you could tell that like he was, she was like his little baby, just like wanting to comfort her and let her know it was going to be okay. So that's one example. And other times I guide people to connect with their ancestors, call in the energy of their ancestors, because there's usually some ancestor who, could be a parent, a grandparent, who they feel such warmth and such deep connection towards, that just thinking of their presence within the birthing room like relaxes them and helps them to feel safe and more protected. And one story connected to that is I remember having a consultation with a client and saying to her, do you feel a strong connection to any ancestors? And she said, no, I believe in Jesus Christ. And I was like, and then I was like, is there a grandfather who, might, or a grandparent who might have made their transition and you had like a really strong relationship with? And then I saw her body soften and she said, oh yeah, my grandfather. And then I said, yeah, you can call in his energy. So it's so interesting how, these, the lineage that we had and still have of connecting to ancestors, connecting with the herbs, connecting with our own spirit and our own guides, how it's been lost because of, different stories that are being made about that. And that makes me sad, even hearing Sister Tayema talk about, this new midwife who can't use herbs, right? Who can't use herbal medicine. And what's the thing that creates the clinical medicine? It's coming from herbs. It's coming from something natural, but the form has been changed so that they can, then own it. So yeah, I would say like my practice is more spiritual. I guide people into, if in a session I'm sensing, the energy of the river or the energy of the ocean, I might guide people to spend time at the river, spend time at the ocean, because those energies are birthing, mothering, fertility energies that might want to be a part of that person's experience. I might encourage them to set up a little plate dedicated to the baby and writing letters. So whatever I am always doing my listening, and whatever I am being guided to for them to strengthen that spiritual connection, then I bring that into the practices.
Okay, so this might be a good time to segue into a next very important question, and that is, what cultural practices, or any type of for the most part, cultural practices that you feel, has been lost or need to be revived. You spoke about the herb, but is there any cultural birthing practice that you feel is being lost or
Yeah.
need to be revived.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is I actually haven't experienced these myself because they've already been missed from my experience in the birthing journey. But I do remember asking a mentor about some of the practices in the Yoruba tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Many of our ancestors, practiced that tradition when they were in Africa, and thankfully that practice still continues across the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. And I know that when people are wanting to partner with each other, a reading is done to confirm, are these people actually meant to be together?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that so important to know?
Oh
Isn't
yeah.
you should be trying to have children with? Oh my gosh, that's really important. So that's one. Another is that around the birthing of the child, there are readings. It might be after the child is born or before the child is born. There are readings, and I don't know specifically, I might need to double check with her, but there are readings being done that help you to understand what the child's purpose is, what their destiny is on the planet. So you're not trying to have them become a lawyer when they're meant to be.
Right. Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to force them into something based on what we're being taught in society is, the career to go after, when everything in their blueprint is saying that they're here for something else.
Even the naming of the child.
Meaning, yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So that usually, or what I learned from her, is that happens after the child is born. It's sort of like the spirits, the energies, the guides, or the child's own spirit tells you their name.
Wow.
Interesting how we insert ourselves, and we could say it's ego, but it's interesting how the soul is coming in, and because we are the parents, we think that we own them, but there's a way that our society has reoriented the birthing practice so that we've inserted ourselves in places where we're really just meant to be guides and facilitators.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
And the others I would say is having like song and ceremony around birthing, like good
Mm-hmm.
food and singing and music and dancing, and really allowing the person to be in their body. Like those are being lost, and it just makes the birthing process very, very different when they're a part of it.
Mhm.
Wow.
That's right. I remember
Thelma.
going. I remember all of this is bringing back. We went to Haiti to help to train midwives, both indigenous midwives and then some nurse midwives as well. And the indigenous midwives were training us. They were like, okay, this is the music and this is how you, and they would get down very low and start to swing their hips. When she's in labor, this is a dance that you show her to do. So, it loosens the baby up, helps baby come out. It's beautiful, looking almost like Congolese dance, very about the hips and about the um, knees and a lot of turning and whirling so that that baby could come down into the pelvis and then through the birth canal. It was beautiful. So yeah, I know that one thing I do before birth is to say a prayer. Before I go out, I have also my ancestral altar, just my altar, but just ask them to bless me as I go out on my birth journeys, and say a prayer that everything will go well and smoothly. One thing that birth convinces you of, if you are there again and again, it's like you feel that energy coming through with that baby. It's a beautiful thing, it's often after birth I'm like so energized and so alive, and I know where that comes from, that comes through with the baby. Um, from the other realm. And so we really need to honor the fact that the woman is a powerful conduit.
Mhm.
I mean, what we do, men can't do. What men do, women cannot do. But what we do is equally powerful. There is no life, without the woman. And there's this kind of fantasy of putting a child in a, giant test tube, and a fetus in a giant test tube, and having them, grow and then hatch out. But that that's going to be a really strange child because when you think about the connection with the mother, when you think about that heartbeat that is beating the whole time and also beating at the site of the navel, one of the things that's very important is not to cut that cord suddenly and quickly. After birth, you need to leave it so it pulses through, and all of that blood, that's the baby's blood. And in
Mm.
some situations, it's up to a quarter of the baby's entire body blood
Mhm.
that you are actually robbing the baby out by cutting the cord early. In the cases of premature babies, and they need their blood.
Wow.
So they're used that pulse at their navel and hearing the pulse also of the mother's heart. So when both of those are taken away at once, it's a big shock for the baby. And also that blood has all kinds of stem cells in it. So it actually renews the baby's body. Baby just came through a whole, process of being squeezed. The bones are shifting over one another. The um, sometimes there's a little cord compression going on. Babies, I think I've mentioned this. Sometimes they come out trying to pull apart the cord. So having been through all of that, they need all of that blood to be able to replenish and renew and restore their beings. And they need it to be a gentle transition. They need it to be a loving transition.
Mm-hmm.
They need, as you pointed out, Dr. Ben, that first touch to be a loving touch and for people to receive them with joy and thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
all of that energy in the room is very important. But I always say Mother, Father, God. And there are people that look at me strange, like, no, Father God, Father God. Jamaica's very Christian with that Father God thing. But there is no way. First of all, life requires masculine and feminine. So to talk about a Father God is to say that nature is lying to us. Nature says that mother and father must be present for life, masculine and feminine. If you don't have one, there will be no life. So you cannot then say that divine energy is masculine only. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be both masculine and feminine to come together in a divine way and to be able to tap in to, the energies that surround us that we call God, that ultimate, divine sea that we're swimming in. To be able to tap into it, we need masculine and feminine to come together and create that divine spark that makes one, and then the one multiplies into a child.
Into many. There are some Christians who will talk about the masculine expression of the Creator as the Father, and then they'll talk about the feminine expression as the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, that Nurturer. The whole spiritual component is important because some persons, depending on if you're Muslim, you may have a Muslim or Islamic traditional or spiritual uh, flavor to that birthing process. Persons are Christian, they may have a Christian flavor to that experience. Depending on your spiritual conviction, um, the point is that that spiritual flavor will be present, because birthing is not just a natural or clinical experience. It is very much so a natural and a spiritual. And so, that spiritual component is important. As I said, that we don't want to call it energy or force or spirit. When a child is born, um, do you know who the person is? Who is the first person touching that child? Do you know the energy that is being transmitted to that child? I mean, in most cases, we don't know the persons. We have no connections. We don't know who the person is at all. We don't know what type of mindset the person was in. And for the most part, we know that the person is a clinician, is carrying out a clinical procedure. I think that we have this may be the cause as to why, because when touch, when we touch somebody, um our body, our muscles stores information. It stores information. When you touch with your arm, your hands, your feet, every part of your body where there is muscle, it stores information. And maybe one time we'll talk about, some people who suffer trauma very young, and then when they get old, they start to have those areas affecting them now. They're not able to make the connection, because of that trauma. But I wanted to ask you, because there are so many misconceptions out there. There are so many people out there, who believe that all of what we're saying, we have advanced, and there's so much advancement. How could we be? This is a retrograde move. To think and talk like this is a retrograde move. What are the biggest misconceptions about natural birth and holistic birth support that you have encountered? But that's one of the biggest misconceptions out there.
Well, one of them is that, midwives are not really trained, and so therefore, they don't have the level of information and skill that doctors would have. But I would say that midwives are differently trained in certain respects. In certain respects, we have more information, and in certain respects, the doctors have more information. And then there's a area that we intersect,
Right.
because there's some grounded information. There's some, I won't call it basic, but there's medical information that we both need to have.
Definitely.
There's certainly some medical processes that, there's a bit of a pushback from midwives. Like we talked about cutting the cord early. We have women that come to us now and say, we don't want that cord cut early. And I am in total agreement with that. Of course, it needs to stay. Sometimes they're leaving the placenta on until, everything drops off together, because they really don't want that disturbed. Sometimes women, there's placentophagy, where, you're actually eating placentas. Some women are doing that. And it's not so strange because all mammals eat their placenta.
Hold on, Theo. Come on. Rewind for me, please. I want you to say that again. I mean, there are persons listening. Just go back over that again for me, please.
Okay, so the placenta is an amazing organ, and in many cultures, it's considered to have a spiritual energy itself. So it's considered like the big brother or the big, elder sibling of the child in certain cultures, in cultures in the Far East. In Africa, the placenta is actually planted in the ground and a tree, and very often in West Africa, it's a coconut tree. It's planted over
Oh,
the center, and that becomes that child's coconut tree. If you look at a coconut tree, it looks like a placenta.
yes.
And
the water inside.
Exactly, you know, and then the trunk looks like the cord, you know,
They
and then
follow the umbilical cord.
right, exactly, and we call it higher water. So higher water is the highest water that you can drink on the planet, right? Because it's up there receiving that sunshine, receiving that power.
Hmm.
I have an aunt actually that we used to have like tens of acres of land in Trelawney, and through some machinations of some white people, land was handed over to them. And so when one of my aunts, great aunt really, drink came to pick her coconut from her tree, she was told that you can't do that anymore because the land belongs to them, not us.
Wow.
He got so upset that she left the island. She was like, this is wrong. This is just, this is
Mm. Wow.
cord. My, being is planted here. And for them to have stolen it, she just couldn't take it and she left the island. So we tell people about, planting the placenta. We inform people because they're interested about eating the placenta. Sometimes people dry it and put it in capsules, or they'll
Mm.
use it for medicine for the baby, or
Hmm.
they'll cut it up and cook it, or they'll blend it. People do all kinds of things. But
I'm more familiar with planting the navel string.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That
They-
part that would fall off after they put on the clamp, and the
yes,
navel
some places it's
that part of the umbilical cord falls off.
yes,
I grew up in a culture where that would have been planted under a particular tree. I think I remember where I don't remember. I remember seeing relatives' one being planted on our my grandparents' property.
wow. Okay, so yes, sometimes it was the entire placenta, sometimes the navel string would be
Hmm.
planted. But
Oh.
it's just in another perspective on eating it. As I say, all mammals eat the placenta except us, and it's also treated as an important medicine in Chinese culture. Not necessarily human placenta, but sometimes. And the people who are feeling, fatigued, run down, uh, you know, just exhausted, will get dried placenta from their herb store or their
Mhm.
medical natural store, and they'll make tea out of it. So, yeah,
But,
think about
yeah,
it.
but I know there's so much wisdom, ancestral wisdom, because something that has sustained you, has sustained life for 9 months, must have not only life-giving properties, but healing properties. But I don't see myself um eating any placenta at all.
Yes, I
But
know
I can just relate. I can relate because it makes sense if this is an organ that kept you safe for 9 months, that nurtured life for 9 months, that
yes.
that kept you healthy for 9 months. It must go without saying that after the seed left that organ, it must have some nutritional or life giving or healing properties. So I mean,
Absolutely.
listening this, it's phenomenal and it's intriguing to hear it, but it's out of the box. Let me say it's out of the box, but rationally thinking, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does. In a way, I would say it's the only meat that you can eat that you don't have to kill or maim to get. True.
So persons who have the argument that you have to kill. You say this is one of the only meat that you have to kill or maim to get.
That's right. Think about it. But I love the idea of planting it, and then there's a, especially a coconut tree. Some people just plant a fruit tree.
Mm.
But when you think about it, those leaves are planted in the ethers, and
Yes.
still bringing that divine energy for that baby, through the placenta. So,
Wow. Wow.
I'd
Now,
love to add something to that. Yeah. So my umbilical cord was planted at a coconut tree. And
what?
oh,
I know where the tree is. I can go back to it.
What?
that's such a blessing.
Your
Yeah,
your your umbilical was,
yeah,
I
man.
mean, I know a lot of umbilical cord was planted on a cotton tree, but yours was planted under a coconut tree.
Yes, and
And you
I,
know where that tree is.
yeah, man, definitely. Grew up.
Have you ever drunk water from the tree?
I think I might have. I'm not sure. I know
Oh,
that others in the community have. I need
So
to.
the community has been drinking water from your umbilical tree, Natalie.
but Natalie, as I say in the States, you better get you some.
And hearing what you just said, Sister Tayoma, about the significance of the coconut tree, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm glad it's a coconut tree. That means something.
For sure.
Yeah. The other thing that I learned from someone is that planting, whether it's the umbilical cord or um, why am I blanking on the name?
Placenta.
The placenta. It
Yes.
grounds the person, right? Keeps
Mm-hmm.
them rooted.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah, it's really interesting
Mhm.
the wisdom that we might lose along the way. Because I heard recently, I don't know which state this was, but that they had banned women's ability to leave the hospital with their placenta.
Yeah.
Wow.
In New York, it was like that until, doulas came in with a woman and it was like, no, we need this. And
Mhm.
it was like, they were standing the ground, and then the hospitals realized they had to bend, they had to, yeah, to
Yeah,
concede.
yeah,
So, no, you can get with most of them. But some of them are like, no, you have to get a funeral parlor to get this. A funeral parlor? Because it's live tissue or dead tissue.
um,
um, so, but that's nonsense. It's part of your body. You know, it's your body. Get your placenta.
Get your placenta. So I mean, I've heard both of you alluded to some extent, but each of you, can you share a memorable birth story that highlights the power of holistic care? Let me let me let me let me let me go with Tayoma first.
Uh-huh.
I want you to share with us a particular um birth story. um, they highlight the power of holistic care.
Wow. Well, all of them. But if I have to select, there's one that I wrote about because it sets itself apart. It's very special. Actually, you know, if a doctor were to see this, they'd be like, you know what, arrest that woman right now,
Mm-hmm.
because they'd be like, you did what? But okay, so there we had one woman who, she came to me a little bit late, but so after we had seen each other just 2 or 3 times, her water broke. And she's like 38 weeks when her water broke. It's Monday, right? So the water broke on Monday. Now in the hospital, what they do is they tell you come right in, and the first thing they do is to check you. What that does, even though it's a sterile check, is that introduces germs. It has to
Mm-hmm.
introduce because it's coming from the outside in. Introduces germs into the woman's body.
Mm-hmm.
So with us midwives at home, we just don't check the woman. Her water's broken. Why would you put your hand up inside her? So know that we can tell by how she sounds
Yes.
and what she's doing, how far along she is. So this particular woman, no, she had no rushes or contractions. She actually was very calm. So we started to use various things to help induce the birth, like with black and blue cohort, well, the herbs and homeopathy to help move things along. And nothing happened. Nothing happened on the Tuesday. Nothing happened on the Wednesday. No, on the Tuesday, we started to give her natural antibiotic herbs and remedies. And we did it every 6 hours, so that every 6 hours she's receiving antibacterial and antiviral, antimicrobial herbs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so we give her that. And the beauty about this is that you could go on NIH, National Institutes of Health, and you could study these particular herbs, and they will tell you, yeah, man, they kill bacteria, they kill viruses, they kill, they're good natural general antibiotic herbs. And so we're not using anything really truly outside of the box. For that
Right.
matter, antibiotics are a bit more outside of the box. So, of course, on Tuesday, we had a talk. Was it Tuesday or Wednesday? Had a talk. The mother's like, look, what's her mother was like, what's going on here? This is not what we usually hear. We hear that she should be in the hospital right away, and here she is. I said, well, yeah, we're taking her temperature. We're giving her herbs she needs to stay febrile. If she, not taking a tub bath, nothing is going inside. You know. So it's fine. She's fine so far, right? And we continued on, and then on Thursday, she started to have her
Mm-hmm.
rushes or contractions. And I could look at her and see, okay, no, this woman is moving into active labor at a certain point. Checked her, and she's 6 centimeters. So we were able to set up the tub, and she was able to have her baby in in the water in the tub. And she was fine. Everybody was good, you know. if she had been in a hospital, if her body was not really ready to go into labor at that, 38 weeks and 5 days was, she may not have had the baby, she may not have gone into labor, she may have ended up with a section. Maybe she needed those 4 days. She got those 4 days and to have her baby. And the baby was strong, healthy, and she was as well.
Wow, wonderful. All right, so that's your that really, I mean, testifies about the uh, power of natural intervention. All right, Natalie, any story
Yeah,
comes to your mind?
yeah. And before the story that's coming to mind, the other thing that I wanted to add is around the misconceptions around a natural or holistic birth. And one of the main ones that I've heard is that birth is going to be too painful, or that someone specifically said to me that they have a low pain tolerance, and so they want to make sure that they can have the interventions and that type of stuff. Which, yeah, it's good to have them if they're needed, and many times they're pushed before they're actually needed. And there is an impact that they have on the birthing process. What's coming to mind is a birth that I actually did virtually because it was in the midst of COVID. So in working with people, they were there in the hospital, and I was there by a video call on. It might have been like a WhatsApp video call, and I was just, so they hadn't called me, and I was like wondering, like, what's happening? Why they haven't called me yet? So I called the couple, and what the mom said to me was that she asked to stop. Like she was in labor, in the process of labor, but she actually asked to stop to get a break. And I asked her what was going on, and she said that there were tears coming up for her. And so I had been working with her before, and this is actually the time when I started shifting outside of the doula model as it is right now, because I think most doulas, how they're trained to work, is that they're there for the entire birthing process. They're there, for a certain number of visits after birth, but usually the visits before birth are free.
Can you
And
speak up a little bit or speak into the mic?
Right.
okay, my is this any better?
Yes.
Ouch.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, very
Much
well.
better.
Okay. Okay. Which part did you miss?
It wasn't exactly miss, but I had to kind of piece together. It was a little, your voice was coming through a little shakily.
Gotcha. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, so I had been working with her for several sessions in the midst of her pregnancy because I just wanted to know more about her experience and really be there for her. So I didn't do the 3, I definitely did more. And one of the things that came up during our sessions is that she had been diagnosed with, it might have been PCOS or some fertility related condition, and the doctors had told her that it was likely that she would not get pregnant or that she would have challenges around getting pregnant.
Mhm.
This was when she was a teenager in college. So she had internalized that, right? Like, my body isn't a body that will give birth, or if I do become pregnant, it will be hard. So by the time she did become pregnant, those stories were already living in her body. And the fear that she was holding is that she wasn't meant to become a parent. The pregnancy was like okay. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. But this moment where she was about to separate physically from the baby, her body was like locked in because of this fear that she wouldn't become a good parent because she wasn't meant to become a parent in general. And so I guided her through a visualization of, imagining herself being a parent and what that would look like. And what emerged for her was the water element, like being in the ocean with her baby, and the ability to play with her baby and to just be free with her baby. And that was the visualization that really reconnected her to the baby in such a way that she could actually give birth. It was through a visualization, through understanding what the fears were, and through guiding her through this practice to release the fear and actually see the image of her becoming a mother in a really joyful way. And coming out of that, I was like, oh, if I knew that before, then we could have resolved that even before you went into the birthing room. And so a major part of my work has been understanding the fears, because they kind of climax in the midst of childbirth, right? It's when you are expected to be the most vulnerable, right? You might be partially naked. There might be people in the room who you don't know, or you might know everyone in the room, but there's like a level of vulnerability that you're experiencing you might never have experienced before. And with that comes even more fear, comes, it might even be more holding and tension in the body. And if we can understand what those fears are before getting in the birthing room, it means that it's a much smoother process. So I think that really speaks to having holistic care versus, something that might just be clinical.
Wow. I thank you. So guys, if you're, those of you that are watching, we have Teoma Fern with us, Natalie Facey. Teoma is a traditional midwife, and Natalie is a doula birth worker. And tonight we are this is a series that we're doing, and tonight we are looking on birth work, because this is such an important um, aspect of who we are, and starting to correct the whole breach that is there. Tonight we're looking at the role of doulas and midwives in holistic pregnancy and postpartum care. It is a series, and so in part 2 we're going to be looking at herbal medicine in birth work, and then in part 3 we're going to be looking at advocacy as it relates for this is something that I believe that it is being lost. Birthing has become an institutionalized a procedure, something that was natural. It has become an institutionalized procedure. And I do believe that there are a lot of persons out there who believe that I have to believe that it should be an option. Not everybody should can benefit or would best benefit from this type of procedure, but it certainly is an option that should be made available. And that's why I've dedicated these 3 series on looking on birth work, the importance or the sacredness of birth work, because it is a sacred it is a sacred experience, and it is something that has been stripped away from us, and I believe that because of that, it has contributed to the disconnection that exists among us as a people. It's like handling a brick or handling a bread in an oven. We're talking about life, and I believe that because it has become the spiritual context has been taken away from it. It has also resulted in a disconnection from us. It has resulted in, to some extent, a disconnection from mothers and their children. And I do believe that it is something that needs to become knowledgeable, and that needs to be um, uh, talked about, and something that needs to be discussed and an option that we need to advocate to see being reintroduced to some extent here, for us. I wanted both of you women to talk to us. What are the most important things a woman should prepare for as it relates to a holistic birth experience? Let me go with you, Tioma. What are some of the most important um, uh, things that a woman should prepare for? And tell us about the whole birthing process, because I heard you talk about the bathtub. Tell us about some of uh, the ways in which this natural process, is done.
So, preparation ideally would include childbirth ed classes. There are very few childbirth education classes here, and they're offered
What's the word? What's the word?
childbirth education.
Childbirth classes. Okay, so that's
Um,
where it should start, especially for newborn mothers.
okay, well, really, the very first trimester is preconception.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're thinking about becoming pregnant, there's a lot of clearing, mental, emotional, spiritual clearing that
Mm-hmm.
should be done. There's a lot of information that at that point you should start to have. There's a lot of preparation because it's like inviting somebody into your house. You want it to be a clean house. Do you want to offer them good, nourishing food? Do you want to be able to, or have loving vibes in the house and make it, a place where, a spirit will want to come and grow and become flesh and come out into the next phase of life. So there's that. And then, as I said, there are some people that have trouble getting pregnant. They would need certain herbs. It's good to do a detox. Sometimes if you just do a colonic, you get pregnant. Women could get,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just a matter of clearing up and cleaning out.
Cleaning up the body.
Right. Other times hormonal balancing is needed. The tubes might need to be cleared. The uterus, also may need to be cleansed. But that usually, it's cleansed every month usually. But it's still, if there are fibroids, there's special care that needs to happen with that and so on. So all of that. Any family issues, for the man, he may be like, oh, can I provide, for this child? Oh, I didn't have, people will say, I didn't have a good relationship with my parent. Am I able to have a good relationship with this child? It's a lot. So all of that, you could take 3 months, you could take a year, really, to prepare for pregnancy. But most people just be like, oh, I'm pregnant. And so it's, learning on the job. And so yes, childbirth education classes are excellent. Watching all there's so many films out there. And all the films make childbirth look like a breeze. It's like, oh, she's in the tub and she just popped the baby out, and it only took 3 minutes. No, they filmed it for 3 minutes, but it took hours or days.
Mhm.
So, realistic expectations should be, created within the woman as to what labor. That's why they call it labor. It's called labor, not relaxation, not, you know,
Hard work.
lazing around. It's labor. It is hard work. But there are ways that you have to learn how to breathe. Breath is very, very important, and you want to learn how to breathe so you can, not experience that much discomfort, and
Mm-hmm.
so that you can balance your own spirit within the process of birth and feel confident and feel calm and energize your body with oxygen. So breath is very, very, very important. Um,
I'm glad you because a lot of persons may be asking, how do you help mothers overcome fear and anxiety around childbirth? But you're saying breathing is very central to helping to deal with that type of anxiety.
Absolutely. Yes, very, very much. Um, and the more you know, the more confident and the more
Mhm.
calm you be. So the education, reading books, there are lots of good books out there on birth, and watching good films. And also, if you have a child, you want to make sure that child understands what's happening with your body. They're gonna have a sibling. Isn't that wonderful? You're gonna be the big brother. So the child is prepared and won't be too scared.
Mhm.
If the child
And
is
that too is important, because we've heard cases of um, children actually your sibling because of the unprepared attention that this new that they have lost. They weren't prepared that the attention would have been shifted from them to this child that they just all of a sudden start to see mommy and daddy giving so much attention to. So that's very important.
very, very important.
and,
But
and I'm sure
let's
it continues, later in life. I mean, there are children or siblings who are adult now who sometimes that rivalry started from that early stage in their lives.
Mm.
Absolutely, yes, very, very true. And we also want to know that I mean, all of these video games where children are actually, some of them are violent and children are killing people
Mhm.
on the screen, but they're not recognizing how, yeah, maybe the same thing will pop up on the screen again the next episode, but if you kill someone, they're not going to just pop up again.
Yes, yeah. They're
You
being
know,
programmed and don't understand the consequences of the
exactly,
programming that they're receiving.
exactly.
Mhm. Um, um, Natalie,
Mhm.
I mean, you can tell us from a doula perspective, what
Mhm.
are some of the most important things a woman should do in order to prepare for a holistic birth experience?
Mhm. A couple of things are coming to mind, and the first one is okay. I have a podcast preparing for pregnancy after loss, because usually the point when people come to me is after they've had a loss.
Mm.
And one of those episodes is on, like, why do you want to have children? It's so important to be with that question, because of course we want to have children. We're humans and we're like wired to procreate. Like
Mhm.
that's just within our
Yeah,
system.
a makeup.
And yeah, and the other one is, sometimes we are looking for the child to fulfill something that's unfulfilled within us. And that's also important to be with as well. Sometimes it's that we're looking to feel a deeper level of love in our lives. And what all of that means is that as the soul is coming in for their own purpose and their own walk on the earth, we're already assigning something to them that isn't theirs. And so getting clarity on that within your own system is really important. And then the other thing that's coming to mind is, you know, whatever your life situation is right now, like Sister Taima mentioned on like cleaning the house. So, what's your work situation, and does that allow for balance in parenthood and working, having a career? Are there changes and shifts that need to be done? What's your diet, your lifestyle? Like, just how are you being in your life right now, and does that support pregnancy and parenting? And if not, can you begin to take the steps to support that? Are there challenges in your relationship? Because it doesn't get better or easier when a child is in the picture. It might become more difficult because there's another human that you need to collaborate to tend to. So that also feels important. And then the other big one that I see show up a lot in this modern age where we're taught to be like independent women is actually calling in your village, right? Calling in your circles of support so that as you're entering into pregnancy, into childbirth, into postpartum, into parenting, you actually have a village around you which you need, right? Many of us don't live in our villages anymore because we're in, these different places because of work and career and other things, and really ensuring that whether it's like online or in person, we are surrounded by circles and circles of support, and we don't feed into this idea that we should be doing birthing or parenting or pregnancy alone.
Wow.
Yes, that's
Um,
very, very important.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Absolutely. And yeah,
yeah.
we
All right.
definitely
So,
want to do that. And throughout the process, different stages. There's that stage, that first stage where you're not even necessarily sharing that you are pregnant
Mhm.
between you and your partner, and that's a more internal time. It's a time where you, as Natalie was saying, you're searching within. And it's also a time where the world seems like a totally changed place. You're tired all the time.
Mhm.
Can't eat certain foods. You can't even smell certain foods. Everything shifts for the woman, and sometimes for the man too. Because sometimes he can have like nausea. He can start to gain weight. He can feel tired. He's really like connected with his partner. All of those things can start to happen
Mhm.
to him. So, just reorienting yourself and recognizing you're starting to make another human. So, it's quite natural to be tired. It's quite natural for your, desires for food to change, shift. And you just need to really be kind to yourself and be able to, you know, give yourself the rest and the love and whatever it is you desire to eat.
Mhm.
wow, wow.
Yes.
And because we wanna because this is such a needed skill set. As I said, that traditional medicine, we're losing so much traditional knowledge, so much traditional wisdom. There are persons listening, there are persons watching, and there are persons who are saying, "Gosh, I didn't even know something like this existed." Some persons know about the clinical midwife. Some persons don't know about the um, traditional midwife. I mean,
Right.
what advice? Let me start with Tiama first. What advice do you have for those considering um, a career, or based on hearing what they hear tonight? What advice would you have for somebody considering a career as a midwife? First to you, T and Tiamo, and then to Natalie, for somebody who is considering a career as a doula.
Right. Okay, so career as a midwife. So as I said, I am actually a trained certified nurse midwife. And when I was going into it, I really had to consider, do I want to be trained, medically in that way? And so one of the things was I want to be able to do births within the context of my environment, which was New York City at the time. And so I would need a certain amount of medical training. I would need to enter um, an organized, one
Formal, what they would call a formal.
formal training,
Mhm.
yes, but one within the medical establishment because those are the people that are licensed.
Right.
So there are very basic traditional, not basic, rooted and indigenous traditional ways of learning. And there's some people that say, I don't want to go anywhere near the medical system. I want to learn an indigenous way, and I'll work, off grid outside of the system. So there are trainings for people like that, and a lot of times it's apprenticeships. Sometimes they start as doulas and then move into apprenticeship, which I did, but then they don't necessarily go on to more formal medical training. But if you want to do that, there you can either become uh, a certified professional midwife, like a CPM, or a certified midwife, or you can become a certified nurse midwife. So, with the nurse midwife, you study nursing first, and then you study midwifery in addition and another program. Or you can do as a professional midwife. It's included, it's all kind of included together, and you have to study the legalities of wherever it is you are.
Practicing.
Right. Here in Jamaica, there's certification to become midwife. So you can become a midwife um, by doing getting a certificate. It's about a year long. Or you can become a nurse first and then get the midwifery certificate. So both are here and both are legal.
And
You
what about I mean, uh is it still legal to do home births here in Jamaica? For those who are listening who just think that it has to be done in a clinical setting,
oh,
is it legally allowed here in Jamaica?
right.
And how is that done?
Oh yes, it is legal once you are certified here. So how is it done? So with the midwives that are within the system and that work in a clinic, you have to go into the clinic in like your neighborhood, and there, you find a midwife who is willing to do home birth, and that midwife will then come check out your environment, see that it's suitable for home birth, and plan with you that when you're in labor, you will call her, and then she'll come to you. Of course, at the clinics, there are certain requirements for you. One of them is to get, like, for instance, tetanus shots. Some
Mm. Which I wanted to talk about because I know that there are some persons that is one of the issues. There are persons who question um um who may not be supportive or who may not be of the opinion that they would
Yes,
want their child to be vaccinated. How does that work? Because I know doing it in the institutional setting, to some extent, there are some vaccines that are almost given right after birth.
yes.
How would that what would that look like for a home birth? Um, is it that what would that look like for a child that is delivered in a home birth setting, as it relates to those vaccines?
Okay, well, as a midwife, a licensed midwife within the setting, we are told, and um, it is impressed upon us that
Mm-hmm.
legally every child is supposed to be vaccinated. Even if they're sick, even if they have a chronic disease, they're supposed to be vaccinated. And if we know that there's a child that's not vaccinated out there and we don't report this, medical professionals are liable to the tune of maybe a year in prison
Mm-hmm.
and or $1 million fine. Now,
Right.
all of this means that, hey, you, yeah, whatever.
So what about those persons who are of the uh, religious belief
Yes.
that religious belief that they don't embrace vaccine? Is there anything in Jamaica or in the law of Jamaica that allows persons to get a waiver that you know of?
Currently, uh, there is not. However, I mean, different professionals handle it differently. There's a naturopathic MD I know, and he says he was provide the parents with a letter that says, if you, as the medical professional, can absolutely guarantee that my child is not going to be harmed by this, I will vaccinate. And of course, no medical professional is going to sign that,
Mm-hmm.
because every single one knows that there are side effects to these vaccines or
Right.
effects that have been made ill by them. So, but so that he says
So
then,
no
well,
one is no medical practitioner is willing to take on that level of responsibility.
exactly, they can't, they won't, because if you look at the inserts, there's like 270 different conditions that the child can be exposed to through taking these vaccines. So um the thing is that the law doesn't care about that. The law says children must be vaccinated. So I tell the parents about the law, and I leave it to them to go to their pediatrician and sort out whatever they can.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So what you're saying is that from your perspective as a licensed practitioner, your
Mhm.
job is to make sure that persons have the knowledge,
Yes,
have the information, but then that responsibility is in their hand in a home birth setting.
exactly.
Okay.
Hmm. Or in
All
the
right.
hospital, they are given three shots actually. One is vitamin K, um, which I don't know. One is vitamin K. Another. Do you want me to go into why this is done?
No, we only have 8 minutes left.
Okay. All right. One is vitamin K. The other is BCG. BCG. You have 6 weeks to get the BCG, which is the childhood tuberculosis shot. It prevents tuberculosis up
Mm-hmm.
to adolescence, not beyond. And then there's hepatitis B. Now, hepatitis B can only be acquired through using dirty needles or having sex. So there's not a lot of justification for a newborn who won't be
Mm-hmm.
doing any of those things for a while to actually get hepatitis B. But the medical system says, well, the parents might forget. So they give it to them at that very young and early stage. And so, what other questions do you have?
Well, it's Natalie now because we wanted to find out for her what advice does she have
Mm.
for someone considering um pursuing becoming a doula?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's coming to mind is getting clear on what their why is. Like why it is that they want to become a birth doula. Um, and the other thing
Oh,
that's
I
coming to
think we
mind is, can you hear me?
yes, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that's coming to mind is deciding how they want to be trained, whether it's in more traditional practices
Mm-hmm.
or more of the conventional practices that might not have as much as the tradition as the foundation. And what else was coming to mind? Yeah, birth work, because birth is unpredictable, because birth
Mm-hmm.
can last over the course of a few days. Birth work
I
follows
think we're
that. So
having
can you hear me?
yes,
Okay.
you're losing signal, but we're hearing you.
Okay. Okay. So I was saying it's deciding their comfort level in terms of leaving home for a couple of days to assist with a birth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not comfortable
Okay.
with that, then that's a challenging one.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of you for being on tonight. I know I have learned so much, and I can just imagine all of these both ladies their contact information has been displayed multiple times on the screen. You can contact them and you can find out just how you can access their services. As I said, that this my intention is for this to be a three-part series. In part two, we want to look on herbal medicine in birth work. It's going to be very, very informative. There is a ton of information that is going to be unleashed on you guys by my, as you have seen so far, my very, very abled panel of presenters. You are going to just be blown away from it. Again, I want to thank both of
So
you.
before
Yes.
before we go, I have to say I'm glad you said thank all of us, because ancestors are here with us as well.
Oh,
Mm.
And
yes.
they are always
Oh, that's
my
right.
grandmother was an herbalist, and she
Mhm.
was helping people in our community to stay good and stay strong. So I want to just give a shout out to her, and to my parents that brought me here and gave me a good firm foundation, and I give thanks for
Okay.
and I also want to say that, woman, you can do this thing. Don't let anybody make you doubt. I just want to say one other thing.
No, go ahead.
There's a woman that came to me. She was small build. She was like 5'1" and little. And she said that when she went into the doctor, the first thing the doctor said when she came through the door is, "Oh, you're going to need a section." And
Mhm.
she said that that moment she knew she was going to walk out that door, because she had that faith and confidence. She's Seventh-day Adventist also. And she
Mm.
had that faith and confidence in herself that, no, my body is made to do this. I can
Mhm.
do this. You're not gonna really like railroad me into a section. And she had a beautiful, in fact, two beautiful home births with me so far. So know that your body is made to do this, and you
Mhm.
can do it. You just have to keep yourself healthy and happy for a healthy, happy birth, wherever it is you choose to do it. I hope you do choose a home or birth center. The other thing is, Dr. Ben, we expect to hear from you about what
Yes.
you do, about what you do for women that want to get pregnant, that want to have a healthy birth, and all the herbs that you know. So next time it's going to be a sharing between all.
Yes, it's going to be very info. As a matter of fact, I'm working on, I'm presently working on a physical space that will allow us to offer in-house care. And
Mm.
since we have spoken, I'm thinking very seriously about a section that would be a birthing center. So
Ooh,
yeah, I'm thinking
all right.
seriously about having a birthing center, because guess what? We can't just think about taking care of persons when they are sick. As I said, life has different compartments to it, and so it would be amazing to have a center where persons can come, where it is not just a space for the practice of natural medicine, but it's a space where the natural birthing process can take place. So,
Mhm.
definitely you're gonna hear more about that as time goes by.
Mhm.
Natalie, any final words from you? And I'm gonna ask Tilma for your final words as we bring this show to a close.
Yeah, I'm just so grateful to be here with you and Sister Tayoma. And I'm hoping that we didn't scare anybody because I can talk for hours about this, like all the crazy things that happen in hospitals sometimes. And
Mhm.
I want to go back to the fact that our body holds this wisdom to birth. Our body holds this wisdom to birth. It's like within our bodies, it's within our DNAs. And when we get to reconnect with that wisdom, then birthing is just a lot more beautiful and a lot smoother. And so my hope is that we keep moving towards that, whether it's working with someone who's holding that wisdom for you until you tap into it yourself, or you inching your way to that through, documentaries and videos and whatever it might be. But I really want to see us reclaiming that power for birthing again.
Wonderful. Thank you. Your
Yeah.
final words, Tilma.
Well,
Tayoma.
just again to really reassure women that they are not alone,
Mhm.
that, their great, 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 great grandmothers all the way up, 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 until now have been getting through this birthing thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. And that a lot of times we create our own complications through
Mm.
listening to the wrong talk, through also maybe eating some of the wrong foods and not moving. Keep moving, get healthier than ever during birth, because now you have this addition to your family. You're going to want to bring all these healthy influences that you have now been practicing during the birth to your family, and elevating your family in that way. And so, blessings to all the ladies out there that are walking this walk. You can do it. I have faith in you. And just have faith in yourself
Mhm.
as the divine bringers of life to the planet.
Ashe.
Wonderful. Again, I want to thank both you ladies, as well as the spirit of the ancestors that has brought us together. And I really enjoyed tonight's show. I was really challenged, really informed. And I'm looking to the other two-part series. The second part is going to be herbal medicine in birth work. You don't want to miss that. And the last show, we're going to be looking at advocacy, how you can add your voice to this very important element of natural medicine. Thank you again for watching us. Until next time, remember, your health is your responsibility, and the greatest weapon against sickness and disease is education, not medication. Bye-bye.
60 minutes with Mama Nature. Feel the breeze, no imitator. Birds them chant and trees them sway. Roots reveal what ancestors say. One whole hour, heartbeat slow, where the healing rivers flow. In the bush, feel the vibe.